My sister thought it would be funny to mess with my medication. That prank almost killed me, and when I begged my parents for justice, all they said was, "Forgive her." But the blood told a different story. Please stay with me as I tell you my story, and please don't forget to support our channel by subscribing, liking, and sharing with your loved ones. My name is Leora. I'm 25, and for as long as I can remember, I've lived with a condition that requires strict daily medication. Missing a dose isn't an option. Taking the wrong dose is even worse. My life depends on small pills lined up in a container, my routine as precise as clockwork. I never thought that routine would be used against me, least of all by my own sister. Maribel is 3 years younger. She's the kind of person who thinks cruelty is wit. If you flinch, she laughs. If you cry, she calls you dramatic. To my parents, she's the baby, the one who gets away with everything. I'd grown up swallowing her digs, her jokes at my expense, because it was easier than fighting. But this time, she crossed into something I can never forgive. It happened on a Friday night. I came home late from work, tired, stomach churning from skipping lunch. My pillbox sat on the counter, as always. I remember lifting the lid, noticing nothing unusual. I swallowed the dose, sipped water, and thought about collapsing into bed. Within 20 minutes, my chest felt like it was caving in. My vision blurred, sweat poured down my face, and the room spun so violently I fell to my knees. The taste of iron filled my mouth, thick and metallic, and when I looked down, I saw drops of blood staining the tile. I barely managed to grab my phone. The memory blurs after that, sirens, flashing lights, the sting of N4. I woke up in the ER hours later, a nurse gently explaining that someone had tampered with my medication. The dosage was wrong, dangerously wrong, and if I hadn't gotten help when I did, I wouldn't have made it through the night. When I confronted Maribel, her response wasn't fear or guilt, it was laughter. She actually smirked and said, "Relax, it was just a prank. You're fine, aren't you?" Fine. I was lying in a hospital bed with blood crusted on my lips and bruises from 4 lines up my arms. But in her eyes, it was all just a joke. I thought my parents would finally step in, finally defend me. Instead, they sighed like I was inconveniencing them. My father muttered, "She didn't mean it," while my mother told me to forgive your sister, don't make this bigger than it is. I stared at them, stunned. My life had been dangling by a thread, and they were worried about Maribel's feelings. That was the moment something inside me broke. The near-death experience was terrifying, but the Rayal wound was the betrayal that followed. To them, my pain was disposable, my blood less important than my sister's comfort. And as I lay in that hospital bed, weak but alive, I realized I would never look at my family the same way again. When I came back from the hospital, my body still weak and my mind filled with fear, I thought at least home would give me comfort. I thought my parents would hold me, tell me they were sorry, tell me they would make sure nothing like that ever happened again. Instead, the moment I mentioned Maribel, their faces hardened as if I had said something offensive. My father, Gerald, leaned back in his chair with his arms crossed. His voice was flat, almost tired, like he'd heard enough. "Leora, she's your sister. She didn't mean it. Don't blow this out of proportion." The words stung more than the 4 needles had. He didn't even ask how close I had come to dying, didn't ask how it felt to wake up to doctors telling me my body had nearly shut down. He just brushed it off as though my pain was a simple inconvenience. My mother, Nadine, was worse. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand with that forced softness she always used when she wanted me to be quiet. "You need to let this go," she whispered, as if Maribel's comfort was something fragile to be protected. "Forgive her. She's young. She doesn't always think." Her tone wasn't pleading, it was commanding. They weren't asking me to forgive, they were telling me to. The message was clear. Maribel's feelings mattered more than my safety, my health, my very life. I tried to explain. I told them what the doctors said. I described how my chest felt like it was collapsing, how the blood filled my mouth, how terrified I was. My words seemed to vanish before they even reached them. My father's expression didn't change. My mother only sighed, her shoulders slumping like I was being dramatic. And when I looked at Maribel, she smirked, like she had won. Something inside me cracked. I had been fighting my condition for years, swallowing pills every day just to keep myself steady, and I had always believed my family was at least a small shield against the world. But in that moment, I realized the shield was gone. The people who should have defended me chose instead to protect the one who nearly killed me. I excused myself and went to my room, but the walls felt like they were closing in. The betrayal pressed on my chest harder than the medication ever had. I curled up on the bed, shaking, the tears coming fast and uncontrollable. I didn't just feel hurt. I felt erased, like my existence was secondary to Maribel's comfort. Hours passed in silence. When I finally looked at my reflection in the mirror, my face was pale, my eyes swollen. I hardly recognized myself. I whispered aloud, not to anyone but myself. If they won't protect me, I'll protect myself. It was the first time I had said it, but the thought had been building for years. Every time Maribel got away with something cruel, every time my parents told me to keep the peace, a little piece of me hardened. Now those pieces formed a wall. I knew I could never depend on them. I had to start depending only on me. That night, I didn't sleep much. I kept hearing my father's words, she didn't mean it, and my mother's, forgive her, like they were mocking me. I knew then forgiveness wasn't possible. What Maribel had done was no accident, and what my parents had done was a choice. Their loyalty was clear, and it wasn't with me. As the sun crept through my blinds, I made a silent vow. I would no longer beg them to see me, no longer hope they would defend me. My life was mine to guard, and I wouldn't allow anyone, not even family, to put me in danger again. Growing up, I learned early that my place in the family was different from Maribel's. She was the golden one, the child who never had to lift a finger, while I was the one expected to hold everything together. If something broke, I was the one blamed. If something went wrong, I was the one asked to fix it. It wasn't said outright, but the message was always there. She could do no wrong, and I could never do enough. When we were little, she would throw tantrums until she got what she wanted. A new toy, an extra dessert, a later bedtime. I remember watching her scream until her voice went hoarse, only for my parents to give in, tired and defeated. If I had tried the same thing, I would have been scolded and sent to my room. By the time we reached high school, the pattern was set. She spent her weekends at parties while I worked shifts at a diner to save money for textbooks. My parents would smile at her stories and roll their eyes at my exhaustion. College was no different. I juggled classes, 2 part-time jobs, and sleepless nights, while Maribel had her tuition paid in full and a car gifted on her birthday. When I brought up the unfairness, my father said, "You're older, you can handle it." My mother only nodded in agreement, as though responsibility was something I was born carrying and could never put down. After the hospital incident, when I thought maybe the seriousness of what happened would open their eyes, I was wrong again. Instead of outrage at Maribel, they accused me of making too much of it. My father shook his head and told me I was overreacting. My mother muttered that I was being dramatic. It felt like I was 12 again, punished for speaking out while my sister was shielded from blame. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed and let the memories crash into me. Every moment of favoritism, every time I was told to be the strong one, every smile they gave her while I sat unseen, it all came back in sharp detail. My body trembled as I pressed my hands to my face. The tears came heavy, soaking into my palms, and for the first time I allowed myself to admit the truth. This wasn't about one incident. It wasn't just the pills. This was the life I had always lived, and I had been too desperate for their love to see it clearly. I thought about the nights I studied until my eyes burned while Maribel lounged in her room, streaming shows on the newest device. I thought about the way my parents praised her even when she failed and ignored my achievements unless they served them somehow. The weight of it all pressed on me until I could barely breathe. In that stillness, I realized how trapped I felt. It wasn't just a house I lived in. It was a cage built from years of silence and dismissal. And as much as it hurt, part of me knew I couldn't keep living this way. Something had to change, even if it meant tearing away from the only people I had ever called family. I cried until my body ached, but beneath the pain was a small spark of clarity. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't dramatic. I was unloved by the people who were supposed to love me most, and that truth was sharper than any blade. After the hospital and the arguments at home, something inside me went cold. I no longer rushed to explain myself or tried to convince them of my pain. I began moving through the house like a guest, speaking less, eating quickly, keeping to my room. Each word from my parents that once cut me now only confirmed what I already knew. The love I had begged for was never coming, so I stopped asking. But silence didn't mean weakness. I started keeping track of everything. Every paper from the hospital was carefully placed in a folder I hid in my desk drawer. The doctor's notes, the list of altered doses, even the discharge summary, it all became evidence. I wasn't sure what I would do with it yet, but I knew one day it would matter. I also began writing. At first, the journal was just a way to stop the thoughts from circling endlessly in my head. I wrote about the fear of choking on my own blood, about the look on Maribel's face when she laughed at me, about my parents' refusal to defend me. Then slowly, the pages turned into something else. They weren't just records of pain, they were plans. Each entry hardened me, reminding me that survival wasn't enough. I needed to reclaim my power. The act of writing became like breathing. I didn't cry as I filled the pages. Instead, I wrote with steady hands, my words sharp and precise. Every sentence was a reminder that I hadn't been defeated. My parents thought silence meant surrender, but in truth, it meant I was building something stronger. At night, when the house was quiet and only the hum of the refrigerator could be heard, I would sit on the edge of my bed and whisper to myself. The words were low, almost secret. They'll regret underestimating me. Saying it out loud gave me strength, like a promise carved into stone. I also began to study them differently. Instead of reacting to their dismissals, I observed. I noticed how my father avoided conflict if it meant confronting Maribel. I saw how my mother rushed to protect her image in front of relatives. These small details went into my mind like puzzle pieces. If they valued appearances above truth, then perhaps one day the truth would be the very thing to ruin them. With each passing week, the distance between us grew. I no longer sought their approval, and strangely, that gave me peace. I started planning my own life outside their walls, making small choices they didn't notice, saving money, working extra hours, forming connections with people who cared about me. I didn't announce any of it. I kept my calm mask in place, answering their questions politely, nodding when they dismissed my feelings. But beneath that mask, a new version of me was forming, one that wasn't afraid of standing alone. The more they ignored me, the more determined I became. Revenge wasn't fire, not yet. It was quiet, patient waiting. And as I closed my journal one night, I realized I no longer feared them, or even the memories of their betrayal. Instead, I felt steady. I was no longer the forgotten daughter or the weak sister. I was the one who remembered everything. Maribel didn't act like someone who had made a mistake. If anything, she became bolder after the incident. I would hear her giggle with her friends on the phone, whispering my name followed by sharp bursts of laughter. Sometimes, when she passed me in the hallway, she'd mutter under her breath, "Careful with your pills," like it was some kind of inside joke. Her cruelty was no longer hidden. It was open, casual, and constant. When I tried to stand up for myself, my parents brushed it off. My father's words were always the same. "Don't hold grudges against your sister." My mother would add, "She's family. You have to let things go." It felt less like advice and more like an order. They wanted peace in the house, but peace meant silence on my part and freedom on hers. Soon it wasn't just happening at home. I began noticing the way relatives looked at me during gatherings. At first, I thought I was imagining it, the raised eyebrows, the half-smiles. But then an aunt pulled me aside and said, "You should stop exaggerating things, Leora. Everyone knows you can be a little too sensitive." My stomach sank. Maribel's words had traveled beyond our walls. She had painted me as unstable, someone who made up stories for attention. She told cousins that I thrived on drama, that I twisted everything to make her look bad. The lies spread quickly, and no one seemed to question them. Why would they? She had always been the favored one, the sweet younger sister. And me? I was the serious one, the one who rarely smiled, the one who carried responsibility like a burden. In their eyes, it was easier to believe I was bitter. One by one, people pulled away. Calls from cousins stopped. Invitations to family dinners grew fewer. Even those who had once been kind kept their distance, watching me with suspicion as though my presence alone brought tension. I wanted to shout the truth, to show them the medical records, the evidence, everything, but I didn't. Part of me knew they wouldn't care. They had already chosen sides. The realization hit me hardest one evening at a family barbecue. I was sitting quietly, trying to blend into the background, when I overheard my uncle laugh at a story Maribel was telling. I caught fragments, my name, the word crazy, and everyone's chuckles. My chest tightened, and I excused myself to the bathroom. Inside, I locked the door and leaned against the sink, staring at the mirror. The reflection looking back was pale, tired, and alone. My throat burned as I held back tears, but eventually they spilled anyway, running down my cheeks in hot streams. That was the moment it sank in fully. Not just my parents, not just Maribel, but the whole family had turned against me. I was standing in a crowded house, yet I had never felt so abandoned. The noise of their laughter echoed through the walls, but in that bathroom I understood something new. I wasn't just fighting my sister anymore. I was fighting an entire family that had decided I was easier to dismiss than to defend. And in their dismissal, I disappeared completely. I could have let their rejection crush me, but instead it pushed me in another direction. If my own family wouldn't value me, then I would create a life where my worth wasn't questioned. The first step was throwing myself into work. I took on extra projects, stayed late when needed, and slowly began climbing the ladder at my job. Every paycheck gave me a sense of control I had never felt before. The savings account I built became more than money. It was proof that I could stand on my own without anyone's help. With each promotion, with every small success, I felt pieces of myself coming back. The bitterness that used to fill my chest turned into determination. I stopped looking for their approval and started chasing goals of my own. I bought better clothes, I furnished my small apartment with things I chose, and I allowed myself little luxuries Maribel had always taken for granted. None of it was handed to me. I earned it, and that made it sweeter. Work wasn't the only place I found strength. Along the way, I met people who saw me for who I was. A colleague invited me to dinner one night, and soon it became a regular thing. Another introduced me to her group of friends, and before long, I had a circle I could lean on. They weren't related by blood, but they laughed with me, listened to me, and made space for me in ways my own family never had. These friends became my safe haven. We shared meals, celebrated birthdays, and comforted one another when life grew heavy. They didn't see me as dramatic or difficult. They saw me as someone worth loving. For the first time, I felt what it meant to belong, and that belonging had nothing to do with obligation. It was freely given, and it healed parts of me I thought would always stay broken. Still, I didn't forget where I came from. The anger hadn't disappeared. It had simply sharpened into focus. Revenge stopped being about humiliating Maribel alone. It became about reclaiming the dignity she and my parents had stolen from me. I wanted them to see the person they dismissed, the one they treated as invisible, and realize how wrong they had been. Not through screaming or fighting, but through undeniable proof of my strength. I kept my distance from them, answering calls less, showing up rarely, but I watched quietly from the sidelines. Every insult, every lie Maribel spread, every moment my parents excused her, I stored away. I no longer reacted with tears or anger. Instead, I observed with calm patience. Like someone waiting for the right opening in a long game, I knew my time would come. In the meantime, I kept building. My career grew, my friendships deepened, and my independence became unshakable. I didn't need their validation anymore. I was no longer the desperate daughter begging to be seen. I was someone who could stand alone, who could choose her own family, and who could wait as long as it took to make sure the truth came out when it mattered most. Time passed, and I had built a life away from them. I rarely visited, only checking in when absolutely necessary. I thought distance would keep me safe, but the past has a way of finding its way back. One evening my phone rang, and it was my mother. Her voice carried a tone I hadn't heard before, urgent but pleading. She told me Maribel was in trouble. Apparently, her relationships had fallen apart one after another, and the man she depended on had left her with nothing. She had also piled up debts she couldn't pay. The girl who once lived without consequences was now drowning in them. My parents were panicked, not because of her mistakes, but because they feared what others might think if word spread. They told me I needed to help. My father's voice was heavy with expectation. Leora, you're stable, you're successful. She's your sister. Don't turn your back on her. My mother added, you've always been the strong one. If you don't step in, who will? Their words burned. Where were they when I lay in a hospital bed fighting for my life? Where was their strength when I begged them to see the truth? They had called me dramatic, ungrateful, too harsh. Now suddenly, I was responsible, the one they depended on to clean up the disaster Maribel had made. I wanted to laugh at the irony, but instead I stayed quiet. I didn't argue or remind them of the past. I simply said, of course, I'll help. The relief in their voices was almost insulting. They had no idea what those words meant for me. Because deep inside, I wasn't agreeing to rescue her. I was agreeing to something else entirely. This was the moment I had been waiting for. Life had handed me an opening, and I wasn't going to waste it. When I hung up the phone, I sat for a long time in silence. My apartment was calm, filled with things I had earned with my own effort, not handed to me. It was mine, built from scratch, far away from their favoritism and lies. Yet here they were, trying to pull me back into their cycle. But this time, I wasn't the same girl they once silenced. I knew I had to move carefully. If I refused outright, they would call me cruel. If I lashed out, they would say I was bitter. No, I had to let them believe I was on their side. Only then would they let their guard down. Only then could the truth come out in a way no one could deny. As the night stretched on, I opened my old journal and flipped through the pages. Each entry reminded me of the promises I had made to myself. To never forget, to never forgive, to one day make them face what they had done. The time had come. My parents thought I was going to save Maribel. What they didn't realize was that I was about to save myself, by making sure they finally saw the daughter they had thrown away. The gathering was held at my parents' house, the same place where I had spent years feeling invisible. Relatives filled the living room, voices overlapping with chatter and laughter. On the surface, it looked like any other family get-together, but I had come prepared for something entirely different. Inside my bag were folders I had been collecting for years, records, photographs, pages torn from my journals. I sat quietly at first, letting everyone settle. Maribel floated around the room like she always did, smiling sweetly, leaning close to cousins as though she were the star of the night. I watched her carefully, waiting for the right moment. When conversations began to fade and people reached for plates of food, I stood up and cleared my throat. The room stilled, eyes shifting toward me. My heart raced, but my voice stayed steady. I began with the hospital papers, laying them out on the coffee table one by one. "Do you remember the night I almost died?" I asked. Some nodded, others looked uneasy. This wasn't an accident. My medication had been changed. Here is the doctor's note. Here is the dosage chart. Here is the report that says I wouldn't have survived another hour if help hadn't arrived. The pages made soft noises as I spread them, each one undeniable. The room grew heavy. I could see confusion in some faces, disbelief in others. Maribel laughed nervously, but I continued. I told them about her mocking me after the incident, about how she twisted the story to make me seem unstable. I spoke of the years of being labeled dramatic while she was excused for everything. I described the loneliness of being blamed when I was the one hurt. Then I opened another folder. Inside were photographs, my pale face in a hospital bed, tubes running into my arm, blood staining the corner of my mouth. Gasps filled the room. Some turned away, unable to look, but I forced them to see what had been ignored. "This is what her joke cost me," I said. "This blood nearly ended my life." Maribel's smile faltered. Her cheeks flushed, and her voice came out shrill. "She's exaggerating. She's twisting everything again, just like always." But her eyes betrayed her. The calm mask she wore for years cracked in front of everyone. She looked cornered, desperate, no longer in control of the story. Whispers spread across the room. A cousin asked, "Is this true?" An aunt muttered, "I never knew it was this serious." Some people shifted uncomfortably, still clinging to the version of Maribel they wanted to believe. But others stared at her with new eyes, their trust breaking apart piece by piece. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I simply kept my voice firm as I listed every betrayal, every scar left behind, every time I had been silenced to protect her comfort. By the time I finished, the room no longer belonged to her. For the first time, the truth was louder than her lies. And in that silence, Maribel stood exposed. No longer the sweet sister they adored, but the cruel, selfish person she had always been. After that night, everything began to shift. The whispers that once worked in Maribel's favor now turned against her. Relatives who used to greet her warmly grew distant, their smiles tight, their words short. Invitations that always had her name written first suddenly left her out. It didn't happen all at once, but slowly, her charm stopped working. People had seen too much to pretend anymore. The cousins who once laughed at her jokes stopped picking up her calls. Aunts who used to defend her avoided eye contact at gatherings. Even family friends, who had always spoken of her as sweet and lovable, now kept their distance. The stories she spun about me being dramatic no longer held weight. Not when the paperwork, the photos, and my steady voice told a truth she couldn't erase. My parents tried to hold the pieces together. My mother reached out to relatives, asking them not to judge Maribel too harshly, while my father insisted it was all in the past. But the damage was done. They had spent years shielding her, and now the shield was shattered. For the first time, they were forced to see what I had seen all along. At home, the silence was louder than arguments. Maribel's footsteps no longer carried confidence. She didn't mock me, didn't sneer, didn't smirk. Instead, she avoided my eyes, moving through rooms like a shadow of the girl who once controlled everything. The power she held in the family was gone, and she knew it. One evening, when the weight of it all had grown too heavy for her to bear, she came to me. Her voice was small, shaky, nothing like the bold tone she always used. "Leora," she said, "I'm sorry. I didn't think it would go this far. Please forgive me." For a moment, I just looked at her. In the past, I would have craved those words, begged for some sign of regret. But now they sounded empty. Not because I wanted her pain, but because it came too late. The apology wasn't born from guilt. It was born from desperation. She wanted relief, not redemption. I answered without anger, without raising my voice. "You showed me who you are. And now everyone else has seen it too. That can't be undone." Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't move to comfort her. It wasn't my role anymore. I had spent too many years trying to protect her feelings while mine were crushed. That chapter of my life was closed. My parents watched this unfold, their faces pale, their expressions tight with regret. They had chosen her over me time and again, and now they were watching her fall apart under the weight of her own actions. They realized too late that their favoritism had not saved her, it had destroyed her. My revenge wasn't loud or cruel. It wasn't shouting or screaming or breaking her down with insults. It was truth, calm, undeniable truth, that finally shattered the image she had built. And in that truth, I found the closure I had been waiting for. When everything came to light, I felt something I had never known before: freedom. For the first time, I wasn't carrying the weight of proving myself or begging for love that would never come. The house that once felt like a prison no longer held me. I walked away and I didn't look back. Life outside of them was steady and real. My job gave me stability, and the people I had chosen as my own family gave me warmth. They were friends who checked in, who celebrated my wins, who listened without judgment. With them, I didn't have to fight to be seen. I was enough just as I was. I built routines that belonged to me alone. The apartment I decorated with my own taste, the quiet mornings spent with coffee, the laughter-filled nights with people who valued me. These small things became my safe place. I no longer longed for approval from people who had turned their backs on me. Instead, I gave myself permission to let go. My parents remained tied to Maribel, but that was their choice. I had made mine. I understood now that family is not defined by blood but by loyalty, respect, and care. Sometimes blood isn't thicker than water. It is the very thing that leaves stains too deep to wash away. I don't know what the future holds for them, and honestly, it no longer matters. My life is not built around their mistakes anymore. It is built around my strength, my independence, and the love I found outside their walls. If you've ever been betrayed by family, hear me clearly. You don't owe forgiveness to those who nearly destroyed you. Protect your peace, even if it means walking away. Do you think I did the right thing by cutting ties with my family, or should I have tried once more to fix things? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like mine.